Welcome to the Diverse Minds podcast, where we give you the tips, tools, and techniques you need to be a mentally healthy and inclusive leader. Each week, you'll hear about a variety of topics linked to mental health, well-being, and diversity that will enhance both your professional practice and personal well-being.
Welcome to the 259th episode of the award-winning Diverse Minds podcast. And of course, it's South Asian Heritage Month and the theme is Free to Be Me. This week, I'm really excited to be speaking to Dimple Mukherjee. Dimple is an occupational therapist, positive psychology practitioner, coach, and author of her latest released Word of the Year, True Stories About Intentional Living Using the Power of a Single Word, which is now globally available and you can get it through indie bookstores. Dimple's life philosophy is rooted in and centered around good health and wellness. She believes that the medicine for our times can be found in the co-creation process with Mother Earth and our universe. Dimple strongly believes in the power of intentional and conscious living as the pathway to fulfillment and well-being. It starts with the spirit and by cultivating a strong relationship with the wisdom within. Dimple has dedicated the past few years to learning and understanding how profoundly intentional living can shape our lives and improve our overall health. She's created programs, workshops, journals, and a book highlighting the benefits of intentional living through the power of one world. Dimple has found this practice to be not only transformative, but also simple, fun, and accessible. And today we're going to be talking about navigating South Asian identities and what it really means to be free to be me in her context. So Dimple, a huge welcome to the show.
Thank you, Layla. I'm so happy to be here.
Oh, it's really exciting. And I always love it when people make the time from different time zones. So I'm really, really grateful to you. And I've just read out your bio, but I think it's really great for listeners to hear what you're working on at the moment.
Yeah. Layla, like anything in my life, it's always evolving. I'm always looking for different ways of expanding my own growth alongside others who are, with me on this journey. And at the moment, I'm working on a few different things. I really value the practice of the Word of the Year. So I'm trying to think of different ways where individuals can actually live their Word of the Year. And at the moment, I'm thinking of creating a deck, like a word deck, like an oracle deck, so that people who really love this practice can actually utilize it throughout the year to help them stay present with their words. So that's one project that I'm looking forward to completing. The second thing that I'm working on, I did a training with the Red School last year on menstruality cycle awareness. And I really would love to bring this work to India, where, my roots are, and work with those that are underprivileged and be able to do that. And I'm just researching how I can be of value and of support to those. So that's still in the research mode right now. And then the third thing that I'm simmering on is just this whole experience around menopause. And I am in the thick of it right now. And I'd love to be able to hold space for others who are in the space with me. Before COVID, I used to facilitate groups in person, and I really miss that. I feel like small group experiences in person holds so much value and richness. I did try to do some online, but I think I really want to return back to these in-person space holding and just being with others.
Oh, thank you, Dimple. So much there. So much of what you said really resonated. So about 5 years ago, I started picking word for the year. So my word for this year is magical. What's your word for this year?
So my word for this year is orphic, which is similar to magical, means extraordinary, also magical, also mysterious. Yeah.
And how do you select your words for the year? Like, what's your process?
I usually will facilitate groups around it. But when it comes to myself, I think I've been doing this practice for 8 years now. And in the last 2 years, the words have just come to me. I do a vision board towards the end of the year. Sometimes I do it before I have my word. Sometimes I do it after, but typically after I've had my word, which really helps to solidify the word. So I'm finding that because I've been doing this for a few years, the process has become more subconscious for me. But in general, through the year, I think what happens is I record and document how my present word has come alive for me. And then at the end of the year, what I find really valuable is reflecting on it and using some prompts to reflect on how this word has showed up for me. And that informs how or what type of word I'm going to need for the following year. And that's where the process starts.
Yeah, really interesting. And as you were talking, I've got my vision board on the back of my office door. So yeah,
Beautiful.
I do that once I have my word as well. And the work around menstruation and menopause, what made you feel like that was your alignment? How did you become aligned to that work? And how does it reflect the type of coach that you are?
Yeah, so it boils down to, when I think about it, it boils down to my own personal experiences. I think it really is about what resonates with you in that moment. So I've noticed that anything that I've done with my coaching or with the recent work that I'm doing with menstrual cycle awareness and menopause has to do a lot with where I am in my life and what I'm noticing then that's needed, where there's a gap, I suppose you could say that, where there's a gap in the system. And that's like with my health practice too, and my profession as an occupational therapist. I started off in illness, really an illness model, a very traditional medical model as an OT, and I still work as an OT full time. But what I'm finding is I'm more curious and interested about preventative medicine and just well-being in general health. So when I look at my practices and anything that I'm working around, it's really from the lens of how can I make this accessible for others? And how, I think most importantly, how can I share my experiences and my sovereignty around my own health and my body with others? I think it really, if I had to nail it down to what the underlying theme is between anything that I'm doing, is sovereignty.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting point because I have had very interesting discussions with people who are perimenopause and menopausal in my personal life, not for the podcast, but and what I have found, and I'd love to know your thoughts on this, is all of my global majority friends and colleagues have said I would not touch HRT. I don't touch it with a barge pole. And all of my white friends and colleagues are like, HRT saved my life. So this is a very interesting thing. And in one of the most popular episodes with Nina Kuiper's Black When Menopause, Black in Menopause, she didn't say either way, but she talks about how you need to look at cultural preferences and cultural background and all of that when you think about menopause support. So yeah, I'd love to know your thoughts around, I'm not trying to make you disclose lots of things, but what your thoughts are in terms of that holistic approach around culture, menstruation, and menopause.
Yes, I'm happy to share. So I feel that I have a unique perspective because I have that perspective of coming from a traditional medical model as an occupational therapist. And there is a big role for OTs with people who are in menopause or perimenopause, but it's more around strategies rather than pharmaceuticals. I guess my take on HRT, it's not for me. At this point, it's not for me. Would I never say no to it? That probably I would never say that. But what happens with anything that I do with my health is the line of defense. So for me, what's my first line of defense, second line of defense, third line of defense? And for me, the first line of defense is always lifestyle. So I'll first approach menopause from a lens of lifestyle. What I've personally started doing that's really helped me is I've worked with a functional nutritionist who's actually based out of England. I've worked with a trainer after having learned that weight training is really not just key to preventing secondary complications such as osteoporosis and falls and things like that as you age, but also for hormone balance. I think really that's key during this phase of our life. So I look at lifestyle, and then the second line of defense is actually nutraceuticals or plant medicine, which I value highly. And I think that has to do, when we talk about culture, I think what happens is really it boils down to, do you know what's accessible to you? It is knowledge partially. And I grew up in a family of Eastern culture, Indian, where a lot of times we're relying on Ayurvedic practices or plant medicine. These have been accessible to me, so I know about them. I've recently completed a certification in art and science of herbalism through Rosemary Gladstar. So I feel privileged and blessed to be able to have this knowledge at my fingertips. So that would be my second line of defense. And then my third line of defense would be pharmaceuticals. So I've been able to manage my perimenopausal symptoms quite successfully for now. And it's not to say that's to be permanent. That's the one thing I've learned about menopause and perimenopause. It's that it's, constantly changing, and really trying to manage my stress. I think that plays a big role, and that's going to be my first line of defense as well. So I hope that answered the question. There's so much more I could say about this, but that's my approach. And culturally, I feel blessed that I have that, the wisdom of my grandmothers, my sisters, and just having that with me in my back pocket.
No, that is super helpful, and kind of very much along the lines of my thinking for myself too. You mentioned your culture, and we before we were recording, we were off air, we were talking about our heritages, and I wondered whether you wanted to tell us a little bit about your particular slice of South Asian culture.
Yes, for sure. I feel like I'm this, melting pot. I was born in Bombay, which is now known as Mumbai, and I was approximately 3 months old. We moved to Taiwan, mostly because of my dad's work. And I grew up in Taiwan I was there till I was 12. And during that time, I was exposed to India quite a bit because my grandparents lived there. We were there for extended periods of time. And then actually at age 10, we moved to England for 1 year. My brother and I, my 2 older sisters were in boarding school in India. So my brother and I and my parents moved to England because my dad's business was expanding. We lived there for 1 year, and my brother and I had a really hard time adjusting to the British system of schooling. We were used to an American system, so we moved back to Taiwan. And then at age 12, I moved to Toronto, which I call home still. And it's interesting because I have these Eastern, exposure to Asian culture, to Indian culture, and then a little bit to, London, England, and then I moved to Toronto. But in the midst of all of that, I'm also, struggling with my identity a bit because I moved to Toronto at a very tender age of 12, I was just starting puberty. And it was a big culture shock for sure. And it took me a few years, I think, until I went to university at the age of 18 that I started to really get comfortable with who I was. But I also struggle with my identity as a Sindhi. So, the Sindhi population in Toronto was small but mighty. We were a very close-knit community. And I didn't really appreciate my culture back then. I actually wanted to break out of it and become a little bit more westernized. And then in the more recent years now, so I'm almost going to be 51, I'm finding that I have this real thirst and hunger for reconnecting with my Sindhi roots and really learning a lot more about it. And unfortunately, none of my grandparents are alive. So I'm trying to find out ways as to how I can get that information. So it's this ever evolving identity, trying to find out who I am. And it's really quite present for me right now, in terms of how I can learn more about my Sindhi roots, but also how to expose my children to my upbringing, because I'd love for them to visit Bombay. They visited when they were tiny, so now they're older. And also, going back to Taiwan. I haven't been back to Taiwan since I was 12, and I'm super curious about what it's like right now.
Yeah, Dimple, and I always call every one of us has a slightly different diaspora journey, don't we? And I always call it inside outsiders, because sometimes we feel inside, sometimes we feel outside. Some bits connect, some bits disconnect, and it is hard. And I don't think we ever stop the identity, like you were talking about menopause and perimenopause. I feel like the identity really fluctuates as well. Like there is a core, but then we're very good at code switching. We're very adaptable. We might know the macro history, but we don't know the micro history, and that's something I really struggle with.
Yes, I can relate with that too. 100%. It's layers. If I were to put a visual to it, it's these concentric circles, and it's expanding and contracting.
And I guess, from our South Asian heritage backgrounds and mental well-being, because this is a really big impact on mental well-being and finding our identity, navigating it. What do you think some of the biggest challenges are in managing shame, asking for help, talking about partition, etc.? Yeah.
Yeah, that's another topic I could probably speak for a long time. But shame is certainly something I think our generation has struggled with, and previous generations even more so. I've grown up in a household where we don't talk about difficult things or feelings, at least not when I was younger. And shame is something I've really struggled with. And I think it became pretty clear when my marriage fell apart how much of a negative impact shame had on my life, because I struggled in silence and in isolation for too many years, probably overextended my stay in my marriage because of that. And it causes harm to self and to others. When I think about the impact it's had on my children, it's all because I didn't have the courage to ask for help or to speak out or to be vulnerable. And it's been quite the journey. I have spoken about shame and shame resilience in one of the books that I've co-authored alongside other writers, and it's called Rising Women. And in that, I do speak about shame quite a bit. And what I've come to understand or realize for myself is the 3 C's. I came up with this model that I think helped me to break out of shame. And that was to have compassion. So mostly self-compassion for yourself, to really just honor where you are in your journey and to extend some tenderness. And then doing some inner child work was helpful. And the second C was courage, having the courage to really be able to be vulnerable. I think it takes a lot of courage to be vulnerable. And then through that, to really build some strong connections with others who are in the same mindset as you are and believe that vulnerability is a strength and not a weakness. And I think that helped me to break out of the shame cycle and build some shame resilience, especially with the culture that we have grown up with. Stoicism is rewarded, whereas vulnerability traditionally hasn't. And I see that changing now with the next generation. And I certainly did it to creating a household where my children can come and speak to me about anything without feeling that they will be shamed. Yeah.
Yeah, it's that judgment, isn't it? Why did you do it like this? Why did you make a mistake? There's so much in there, isn't it? And I think a lot of that is fueled by scarcity and fear. And, if you do it wrong, you're out. You're literally out of the community. If you do it wrong, you're stupid. And there's a lot, isn't there, about having to be clever, having to be smart, having to know all the right answers all the time.
Yes, 100%. And it really is unfortunate because it prevents, others from growing. You're just, it's really hard. I still see it in some households where it's still very traditional. And I hope that collectively we're working towards building shame resilience, because I think there's a lot of work to be done in that area as well.
Yeah. And building on that, then what does the term resilience mean to you?
Shame resilience? The term resilience.
Yeah,
okay.
Well, it could be both actually. And shame resilience is a really interesting term. So maybe you'd like to define both for yourself.
I think resilience is being able to sit with your difficult emotions and not bypassing them, because I think it's information. I know that I went through a dark period in my life where I was numbing my emotional pain. And because of that, I probably stayed in suffering for far too long. So I do believe that resilience is not just about falling down and then getting yourself back up. I think resilience is also being able to sit in your difficult, challenging emotions, not bypassing them, and really working with them and trusting that they are leading you to another better side. I also feel that resilience is, for me, trusting and keeping faith in the face of adversity. It's really hard to do sometimes, but yeah, I think those are my definitions of resilience. And when I think of shame resilience, it's similar, and it's really about coming back to yourself, honoring yourself, but also looking at what are your emotions trying to tell you and working through that to build your shame resilience. And I had talked about the 3 C's, which I think are key: the compassion, the courage, and the connection to helping you build shame resilience.
Really helpful. Thank you. And I don't think many people do define resilience as that, being able to check in with your emotions, because I think that's very, very helpful. And I always say, resilience isn't a sticking plaster. It's not about sucking up bad behaviors, but it's about thinking, what choices do I have? Have I been here before? What did I learn? What could I do? What would I like to do? Who can help me? And then thinking about workplaces, we're in South Asian Heritage Month at the moment, and we have a connection, but we're also different people. We've had different journeys. And what do you think workplaces could do to understand these different South Asian perspectives better than is happening? So there's a lot of food, fun, and flags, which is nice. It's nice to eat mithai, it's nice to have henna, but we know there's so much more to it
I
than
know.
that. Yeah. And so what do you think workplaces could be doing, particularly in the global north?
Yeah, when I was thinking about that, so it's interesting because as a clinician, have worked in the hospital setting for a long time, and it's been a while. I am self-employed and I work privately with a small firm. And it's interesting. So I've never worked in large organizations or corporations, but I do know that, you're right. There's a lot of talk about inclusivity and diversity and, having experts come in and do professional trainings. But I think the one thing, and I don't know if this is being done, it might be, I think having small focus groups are really helpful. I find that when there's focus groups with individuals from different cultures and having them in a small format, I think might be helpful to have that.
I think they do happen. I think they often happen periodically and in a piecemeal way, so not necessarily consistent. And then what happens as a result of those focus groups? Do things change, or it's just very much like, oh, it's this fill in the blank history month, we better do something. And the easy thing to do is, for people to try on a sari or do something like that, which is lovely. But then it's like, well, what's the legacy of this?
It's a hard question because I've experienced that in my small firm. And I think, other than, I'm just thinking about my small firm where there is actually no person of color. It's just me. And it wasn't something I used to think about until recently when, during COVID, I was like, wait, I think I've experienced racism and obviously subtleties. Like there's so many subtle experiences of racism. And I'm just trying to think in the moment, like when we're doing our calls on Zoom, it's very clear that I'm the only person of color. And it hasn't been addressed other than having perhaps side conversations with peers where we have discussed. And I agree. I don't think that the onus should be on the individual to necessarily educate everyone individually. So I'm actually not sure what would be the best way to bring that to the workplaces other than having conversations with people and real and honest conversations, I think. And you're right, having inclusivity or having, attending events, reading mithai or attending a Diwali function is not necessarily it. But yeah.
No, I know. And I think that's the thing. It's a multi-pronged approach, isn't it? And I think one of the key things, going back to your point about resilience, is that many people have to sit in their discomfort around, it goes beyond the stereotypes that you see on fill in the blank show. It's so much more than that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, so much more. And I'm, forever learning also myself on, also, our culture has a lot of, there's been, racist acts towards, people who are Black. And that's something that I'm learning culturally also and noticing. I mean, I've grown up with it and it's the biases that we carry. And so it's a big thing. It's one of those, experiences in my life that I'm trying to learn and, work through as well.
Yeah, and I think we all are. And I think it's really important that you mentioned that. And I did an episode a couple of years ago about tackling anti-Blackness in South Asian communities because we really need to do that. And we really need to look at ourselves and we really need to understand the legacy of colonialism and how that's happened. Yeah.
Yes, 100%.
So Dimple, you're an incredible person. You do so much. You have a full-time job. You're self-employed. You do, you do a lot. You're a parent. So how do you look after your own mental health? What are your top three tips that you'd like to share with listeners?
I have tons of tips that a little toolkit that I pull out what I need depending on what period of my life I'm in. So as we talked about, perimenopause right now is at the forefront, along with being the sandwich generation. I'm finding that really also quite challenging. I have 2 adult sons and one who's 16, and then I have aging parents who are in their 80s. And I'm really feeling it right now because, research is also saying that children don't leave home as early as they used to, which is very much evident in my life right now. So while being in the thick of perimenopause, so I'm going to share with you what I find helpful, and of course, this may not be for everyone, but I definitely protect my sleep. I think that's key for me to be able to function properly during the day and have energy and just, feel rested. I know rest is a big topic too these days. And I don't feel guilty for resting. And I think it's a mindset. So I would say that that's my number one go-to is sleeping/resting when I need to. I've certainly slowed down the pace of my life quite a bit and really worked hard at not feeling guilty about it. So that would be my one tip. And the second thing that I find helpful is fueling my creativity. I have to be honest that in the past few months, that's been hard to do because I've been in the thick of caregiving. And, but creativity, whenever I can get it, whether that's through my garden right now, because it's summer in Toronto and my garden is flourishing and just growing vegetables and plant medicine. That's really been my fuel for the summer. But every season, there's something different in terms of creativity. I also go back to my word of the year a lot because I love that practice because it's simple, accessible, but it's also super creative. You can do whatever you want with it and how you choose to live your word. The third thing I would say is my plant medicine for support. I find plant medicine and plant allies are really useful for mental health. Like they're really actually quite powerful, not for all, they're powerful for all ailments, but in particular for mental health support, for anxiety, for stress. So I'd say those are my top three: sleep, creativity, and really making time for your creativity and, working with the plant allies.
Beautiful. And I've recently been doing a lot of learning how to grow from seed and doing these things too.
That's amazing. I love it.
Sometimes it's really frustrating because things don't go how you want, but it teaches you about life as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, completely. And they have so much to teach us too. So I'm excited for you.
Thank you. And if people want to know more about you and your work, Dimple, how should they contact you? How would you like people to get in touch?
I'm most active on Instagram. I'd say that's the best place to find me. It's just my first name, Dimple _ my last name, Mukherjee.
Brilliant. Thank you. And I'll include that in the show notes. And I've also included the link to your website. And it's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you for South Asian Heritage Month and Free to Be Me, how we want to be free to be ourselves, how we need to uncover that story. So thank you so much for your time, your wisdom and your insights.
Thank you so much, Layla, for having me here and for welcoming me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. And listeners, take care and we'll catch you in the next episode. Bye for now.
Thanks for listening to the Diverse Minds podcast. Don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you access your podcasts from. You can also connect with me on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Tune into next week's episode of the podcast, where I'll bring you more insights on mental health and inclusion. Bye for now.